Hey guys, it's Heath here with the Torana hatchback again. The car's on the Hoist at the moment, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to do a quick video showing the underside of the car, some of the modifications, some of the little packaging changes and structural changes, all that kind of stuff that I've implemented on the car over the years. So hope you get something out of it. We'll rip into it now. Cheers. I hope you can deal with the sound of my voice, because this video is just going to be me walking around pointing at things and telling you what they are. We're at the front of the car. The first thing that you see probably are these fiberglass brake ducts. They literally went on about half an hour ago, so they're an aftermarket fiberglass brake duct. The air comes in through the front spoiler. I tried to make it so that you couldn't see any fasteners through there. I wanted quite a neat look with no bolts and nuts and studs and stuff hanging through. So I've achieved that by just mounting them using a stainless kind of spacer and fastener that I made there. I just combined a bit of tube and a bolt and a nut, and there's a head on the inside of that duct that goes into that nut there, and then there's just a nylock on the top. That's mounting onto the bottom lip of this factory inner guard kind of skirt or chassis rail skirt. This one's been cut out and I've put some aluminium there to make it a bit lighter rather than the steel, but essentially that's a factory part, as is that for an A9X or L34 Torana, and the front spoiler is off the same kind of thing. So that all should work quite well. That mesh there is something that I was just advised to add, maybe to stop rocks getting caught in the brakes. I don't know if it'll work well or if it's necessary. If the brakes overheat, I'm just going to take that mesh off, or if it doesn't collect any rocks, then I'll probably take it off as well, but I'll give it a try with it. The front suspension is kind of pretty standard. It's got a bit of a Shelby drop thing done up there where I drop the pivot point, which is really common. An LX RTS Torana actually had that already. I've just modified that in the kind of UC front end, and that's to give you more of a more aggressive camber gain as the wheel kind of bumps, and as you hit a bump and the wheel travels up, it gets more camber more quickly essentially. There are no shocks in it at the moment. They're just a kind of heavy duty 850 pound spring in the front. The rest of it's all pretty normal down here. I've added some tow hooks onto the most robust area of the front of the car. That's just in the case of emergency. I've actually got something I can access. Toranas were never exported, so they never came with any tow points, which was a bit annoying, so I just added them myself. The other thing worth mentioning is I've got a LH Torana steering rack, which is the fastest ratio they made. I've just made up some aluminium bushes to solid mount it, so it doesn't have any rubberiness. Make it a bit more harsh and a bit more direct. The mounting of the whole subframe is actually solid as well, so that used to have bushes. I've actually moved it forward a little bit, moved the whole kind of thing forward to make the wheelbase a little bit longer and give it a bit more clearance with the wheels steer with the big offset, and that's solid mounted. So that's just a plate of steel I welded in there and a bit of steel tube in there that goes around the bolt. The bolt has to go in from the other direction because of how I've done it. Normally the bolt head would be at that end. That can't be done with this configuration, and that's because I added a jacking point there. So I've actually, that normally is just like a flat kind of box section. It's very weak. I actually made a bit of a kind of like a shortened off or sawn off pyramid shape. Maybe it's better seen on that one, probably a bit easier to demonstrate. Anyway, that's a bit higher up on the car, so it's easier than trying to jack it off these here. And I made it out of stainless, so if it scratches through the paint, it doesn't start rusting, which I think is a benefit. Normally this car would have a sway bar and shock absorbers and stuff installed, but they're not in there at the moment. It's got a winged sump with a diamond plate in there, like a pretty good baffling kind of system with trapdoor hinges. So that should be quite good for racing with corners rather than just drag racing. The gearbox is a TKO 600 Tremec. It's an aftermarket 5-speed gearbox, very high torque rating. I've just given it a refresh. You can see some of my lightening efforts, bit of NASCAR style weight reduction in the bell housing there. The full exhaust is stainless. It's a 2.5 inch. They're just tri-Y off-the-shelf pipes that I've kind of modified to make them a bit of a cone over design rather than having the kind of weld on the outside further down where they have a bit of a messy flow on the inside of the collector. So I've just cleaned that up and made them a bit of a cone over design, kind of like what a pacemaker has. Should flow a bit better than the standard one, but otherwise the sizing is pretty modest and everything. It's got just a round flange there, and there goes into 2.5-inch pipes. This is a baffled expansion chamber, so that there is basically just to kind of emulate it having straight pipes, that the all of the pulsations can be dissipated in that box area. It's got some plates in there so that it can't flow directly down the tube. It has to, equalise and kind of get to a more homogeneous state. The gearbox crossmember here, that's a cast aluminium one from Delos. It was pretty ugly when it arrived. I had to do a fair bit of work to deburr it and add some more shapes into it there, and just kind of trim it down everywhere where it wasn't needed so it's a bit prettier and a bit lighter, but I'm very happy with how that looks. Everything in aluminium here has been bead blasted and water blasted, like hydro blasted, and I think it has a very nice surface finish. The bell housing fits into that category as well. It's got an oxy sensor, a wideband oxy sensor in each tube. They go to a Haltech WBD2 or whatever it's called, so that should work quite well. While we're kind of looking at this stuff, I'll show you some of the plumbing, I guess. That's the hard line made in stainless, which comes down from the brake booster. You can't really see that, but basically that's the hard line to the rear brakes. It comes down the chassis rail and then it kinks in here. I don't know how much we can see. It goes up above the tail shaft there and goes into where the hydraulic handbrake is. The mechanical handbrake is actually using these cables, and it's kind of hidden behind all the shielding there, but you can see them up here further towards the top of the firewall, and that goes up to a little cutout, I guess, or a pass through in the floor where the foot brake, the factory LX Torana foot brake, is still being used. It has two separate cables, one for the left, one for the right, so that you can adjust them separately. They just pass through this device, and I should probably explain what this device is. So get some adjustment there on those cables. But what we're actually looking at here is a tail shaft loop and also a strengthening piece that goes from one chassis rail to the other. So the standard chassis rails come down along the car and then they stop there. I have extended them. I've made them longer, so they go along to where the lower rear suspension arms mount. That's the factory lower rear suspension arm mounts. So now it's kind of boxed in. It used to just be sheet metal there, but it's a little bit of a box section there. I've kind of just stitch welded all that on. And then there's this joiner piece from the left-hand rail the whole way to the right, and it's got a hole in it for where the tail shaft passes through. And that gives it a whole lot of strength, a whole lot of torsional rigidity. So that seemed like a pretty good idea. It does come with a few packaging limitations. A lot of your cables and hoses and pipes and stuff like to just go straight down the car. Of course, when you put that in there, it's a bit of a barrier. So you need to be a little bit more creative about how those services pass along the car. And in this case, I think I've done it pretty elegantly. So there's some pass-throughs there for the handbrake cables. The hydraulic cable actually the hydraulic hard line actually goes up into the interior there anyway, so that works out well. Comes back down as a separate pipe there, and that kind of follows along. It's a bit hard to see, but it follows along some of those cables there. And it goes to the standard location, which is there on the upper mount, and it turns into a hose there that goes to the diff. That's just a flexible hose there. I've put a little bit of rubber stuff around it to make it a bit sheltered from hitting things as the suspension moves. The rear suspension's just coil springs like that, pretty normal. It's got Shockworks dampers all around, which are pretty high-end, big bore dampers. The rear suspension is a little bit more unique, however. I've replaced the upper suspension link or there's normally a pair of arms there that are triangulated. This is a kind of triangular, like a wishbone essentially. It uses the standard mounts up there, although I've had to fit some bushes and some bushed rod ends, they call them bushed rod ends, instead of conventional cylindrical bushes. And then there's a huge ball joint there with a nut that goes in there. There's a taper in there and whatnot. A nut with a split pin, and that's part of kind of the backbone of the diff, which is a Borg Warner. It's a full floater Borg Warner 78 diff. It's got gun drilled 31 spline axles. There's normally a sway bar in the back of here. It's just disassembled at the moment, but yeah, it's a negative camber full floater 31 spline Borg Warner. So it's a pretty serious Borg Warner. It's got a true track centre, and the upper link is all cold drawn seamless. The bottom ones are chrome moly. I just TIG welded all that stuff. It's pretty easy to make it yourself. So that was pretty good. The bracketry is a bit more complicated though. The bracketry that incorporates the lower arm mounts and also the kind of pad at the back for the sway bar D-bush to go on, that's all laser cut. So I drew that up in CAD and laser cut it. The rest of the exhaust is pretty conventional. It's just a 2.5 inch stainless thing. It's got MagnaFlow kind of semi-offset or semi-straight through, whatever they call it, mufflers. And the tail shaft is just a conventional steel one with a pretty conventional arrangement. I did drop my phone. I did leave the third bump stop there, which is a factory thing on a UC Torana. I left that in there. I just trimmed it to suit the new position that the wheels go to with the guard cut and everything. And the bump stops on the diff have been extended quite massively. So the rubber would normally start down around there. So I've welded a bit of tube in there as a riser, and it still contacts the standard pad at the top. So that's a lot of the car done. Where this link moves in its motion path is a little bit different to standard. So normally these bushes on the standard arms would be further forward, like up there, there'd be some little ears on the diff. In this case, it's a lot further back. The top link is essentially about 50% longer than standard, and I've actually made this shape. I don't know if you can see a kind of rounded recess there. That's a bit of space for this link or for that ball joint to go up into when the car gets to full bump. And it did actually hit there, but that was I didn't have the bump stops in or anything, so it won't hit there now that the car's properly assembled. And I made that out of the old spare wheel well. So there used to be a spare wheel well in this kind of corner of the car in the boot, and I just cut that out because I was doing so much modification in the floor of the car, and I repurposed it. I repurposed that shape in there. The boxy shape that you see ahead of it is actually the bottom of the battery tray. So the battery tray's in the boot, and I just incorporated that into the shape of the floor. A bit neater packaging, get the weight down low, and the floor generally is handmade in this area, so it doesn't have any of the pressings or anything like that you would normally see here. It's a bit kind of neatened up and stuff. That's the trailer plug wiring. That's the LPG filler hose. You can't see that when the car is at ride height. You can only see it when you're properly underneath the car, so it's normally hidden. But yeah, this bit of floor there is fabricated, and the front bit, of course, where that spare wheel well is, I rolled all that up and shipped myself. This drop tank looking thing is not actually a drop tank. It's just part of the floor. It's a bolt-on piece of aluminium that I made up. I drew it in CAD and had it laser cut and folded and welded up with the TIG as one of my first alloy welding jobs. And that is just a cover for the LPG tank, essentially. But if you remove it, then you'll just have a giant hole in the floor. So it acts as, I guess, a bit of a trim piece and a sealing piece for the sealing of the interior of the car. It's made out of 2mm alley, I think. And I tried to clear coat it. It's all peeling off. It looks like shit. So I've just got to clean that up a bit better, and it'll be good to go. But that's pretty much the car. I think the one of the areas I missed was I have made some joining pieces here to strengthen up the area between the upper arm mounts, which are still standard, as I said, but they are now kind of braced down to this area on the lower arm mounts. There's a bit of extra, robustness there, and then that's all tying that motion or that force kind of path the whole way through the new extended chassis rail. So I think that's a pretty good way to go, and it wasn't too intrusive as far as interior space and stuff is concerned. You can still have passengers in the back, no worries. So that was one of the pretty important goals, and I think I've done decently at achieving that. So anyway, I reckon that's a pretty good kind of quick summary of years of work. I hope you found it instructive. Cheers.